That night, New York was colder than usual. I, Mr. Nightwraith, Korshun, was on my way back after a late-night recording session about folklore ghost stories. Snow fluttered down, and the sky was pitch black like ink. As my car passed through a hollow street, a place notorious for its decades-abandoned houses, something strange happened. The engine suddenly stalled. I frowned, trying to restart it, but only dry clicking sounds answered me. With no other choice, I put on my thick coat, grabbed my flashlight, and decided to find temporary shelter, at least until I could get a signal to call for help. When the flashlight swept across the street, I spotted a house, dilapidated, rotting, yet strangely a dim light, flickered behind the torn curtains of a second-floor window. An abandoned house with lights on? My instincts told me to turn away, but curiosity, and perhaps the part of me that craves uncovering the strange, won out. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Inside, the house was freezing cold. Not a sound except for the eerie creaking of wooden floorboards under each step I took. The flashlight flicked across the room, peeling walls, decayed furniture, and strange markings scribbled all over the walls with something dark. I walked down the dark hallway and stopped before the staircase leading to the second floor. Right then, I heard a whisper. At first, it was very faint, like the wind squeezing through the cracks, but then it became clearer, a broken, mournful voice. "Don't go upstairs." I froze. A cold chill ran down my spine. I shone the flashlight up the staircase. No one. I swallowed hard and kept moving. One step, then another. The higher I climbed, the clearer the whisper became, echoing right behind me, as if someone was following. When I set foot on the second floor, the flashlight suddenly flickered. In the brief flashes of light, I glimpsed a figure. Gaunt, long hair covering the face, standing at the end of the hallway. I held my breath, not believing what I was seeing. The figure didn't move, but something was wrong. As if it didn't belong to this world. A small sound came from the corner of the room. "You will stay here forever." I spun around, no one. But when I turned back toward the hallway, the figure was closer. Only a few steps away, I turned and fled down the stairs. Bare, wet footsteps slapped against the wood right behind me. Reaching the door, I stumbled, and the flashlight flew out of my hand, rolling across the floor. In the beam of light, I saw the facehune of the figure for the first time. Distorted, deathly pale, eyes sunken like black pits, mouth stretched unnaturally wide into a grotesque grin. It crawled toward me, step by step, soundlessly. I scrambled to my feet, kicked the door open, and dashed outside. Glancing back one last time, the house was now completely dark, as if no light had ever existed there. When the police arrived, they told me, "There's no one there. That house has been abandoned since 1962. The former owner, a young woman, vanished without a trace on a freezing winter night. They said that sometimes people could still hear whispers in the wind, and those who entered on that house didn't always come back. Since that night, I, Mr. Nightwraith, occasionally still dream of the dim light behind the tattered curtains, and a familiar voice whispering my name from the freezing darkness." The wind howled outside my secluded cabin, a lonely outpost nestled deep in the woods where the nearest neighbor was miles away. I, Mr. Nightwraith, had chosen this isolation deliberately. The world was too loud, too chaotic, and I craved the silence of solitude. My cabin was my sanctuary, a place where I could write, think, and exist without the clamor of humanity. But tonight, as the storm raged and the trees groaned under its fury, something felt wrong. It was past midnight, and I sat at my desk, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. My typewriter clacked rhythmically as I worked on my latest novel, a gothic tale of ghosts and betrayal. The story was flowing, but a nagging unease tugged at the edges of my mind. The wind wasn't just howling, it was screaming, carrying whispers that seemed to linger just beyond comprehension. I shook it off. It was just the storm, I told myself. Just the storm. The cabin was old, built decades ago by some recluse who'd long since vanished. Its wooden walls creaked constantly, as if the house itself were alive, breathing, watching. I'd grown used to the noises over the months, but tonight they were different, sharper, more deliberate. A faint tapping came from the window behind me, irregular and insistent, like fingernails drumming against the glass. I froze, my fingers hovering over the typewriter keys. Slowly, I turned to face the window. The curtains were drawn, but the tapping continued, growing louder, more urgent. My heart thudded in my chest. It's just a branch, I thought, though I knew the nearest tree was too far to reach the window. Steeling myself, I stood and approached the window, my hand trembling as I gripped the curtain's edge. I yanked it aside. Nothing. Just darkness, the storm's fury blurring the world beyond the glass. No branches, no figures, nothing but the endless night. I exhaled, chastising myself for letting my imagination run wild. I was Mr. Nightwraith after all, a man who spun tales of terror for a living. I should know better than to scare myself. But as I turned back to my desk, the tapping resumed, this time from the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoed through the cabin, each one reverberating in my bones. I froze again, my breath catching in my throat. Who could be out here in the middle of nowhere, in a storm like this? No one knew where I lived. No one visited. Ever. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace, its cold iron grounding me as I crept toward the door. The knocks came again, louder now, shaking the frame. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. No answer, just the wind, screaming like a banshee. I hesitated, then pressed my eye to the peephole. The porch was empty. No one stood there. No footprints marred the snow piling up outside. My grip on the poker tightened. I was alone. I had to be. But as I stepped back, the door rattled violently, as if something were trying to force its way in. I stumbled backward, my pulse racing. The rattling stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving only the howl of the storm. I locked the door, double-checked the bolt, and backed away, my eyes darting to every corner of the room. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in. My lamp flickered, casting wild shadows that danced like specters. I told myself it was just the storm, just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew better. Something was here with me, something that wasn't human. I returned to my desk, trying to focus on my writing, but the words wouldn't come. The air felt heavy, charged with an electric tension that made my skin crawl. Then I heard it, a low, guttural whisper coming from the hallway that led to the bedroom. It wasn't the wind, it was a voice, indistinct but unmistakably real, murmuring words I couldn't quite make out. I gripped the poker again and moved toward the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the rug. The darkness beyond the lamplight was absolute, a void that seemed to pulse with malice. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling now. The whisper stopped, but the silence was worse. It was the silence of something listening, waiting. I flicked on the hallway light, half expecting to see some monstrous figure lurking in the shadows. But the hallway was empty, the bedroom door slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it open. I never left it open. My mouth went dry as I approached, the poker raised like a talisman against whatever lay beyond. The bedroom was cold, far colder than the rest of the cabin. The window was closed, the curtains still, yet an icy draft slithered across my skin. The bed was untouched, the room exactly as I'd left it, except for the mirror. The full-length mirror on the wall, an antique I'd found in the attic when I moved in, was different. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't right. The eyes were too dark, too hollow, and the smile... I wasn't smiling. I backed away, my heart hammering. The reflection didn't move. It just watched, its gaze boring into me. Then slowly it raised a hand and pressed it against the glass from the other side. I screamed, stumbling backward, and the light in the room flickered out. Darkness swallowed me. The poker slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I activated the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing the room. But the mirror was empty now. No reflection, no figure, just the glass. I didn't dare look too long. I grabbed the poker and fled back to the living room, slamming the bedroom door behind me. The storm was louder now, the wind shrieking like a chorus of the damned. The lamp flickered again, and the whispers returned, louder this time, coming from every direction. They weren't just murmurs anymore. They were calling my name. "Night Wraith!" they hissed, the words slithering through the air like a serpent. "Night Wraith, come to us!" I barricaded myself in the living room, pushing the couch against the door and dragging the bookshelf to block the hallway. It wouldn't hold forever, but it was all I could do. My phone was useless. No signal, no way to call for help. I was trapped, alone with whatever was haunting this place. The whispers grew into a cacophony, a chorus of voices that clawed at my sanity. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, fleeting shapes that vanished when I turned to look. The air grew colder, my breath visible in the dim light. And then, from the other side of the barricaded door, came a new sound. A slow, deliberate scratching, like claws dragging across wood. I clutched the poker, my back pressed against the wall. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low, guttural laugh that made my blood run cold. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. The lamp flickered one last time and went out, plunging the room into darkness. In the silence that followed, I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming from inside the cabin. They weren't in the hallway or the bedroom. They were in the living room with me. I swung my phone's flashlight wildly, but the beam revealed nothing. The footsteps circled me, slow and predatory, accompanied by that same guttural laugh. "Night Wraith," the voice whispered, so close I felt its breath on my neck. I swung the poker blindly, hitting nothing but air. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, I thought it was over. Then the couch shuddered, as if something massive had slammed into it from the other side. The bookshelf toppled with a crash, and the door to the hallway flew open. I didn't think. I ran, sprinting for the front door, fumbling with the lock. The storm roared as I flung the door open, the icy wind blasting my face. I stumbled onto the porch, the snow swallowing my boots, and kept running, not daring to look back. The whispers followed me, carried on the wind, but I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the woods. When I finally turned, the cabin was dark, its windows like empty eyes staring into the night. Nothing moved. No footsteps, no whispers, just the storm. I don't know how long I stood there, shivering in the snow, but eventually I knew I couldn't stay. I had to go back. My keys, my wallet, everything was inside. And besides, it was just a house, just a storm, just my imagination. I returned at dawn, the storm finally spent. The cabin looked normal in the gray light, almost peaceful. The front door was still open, snow drifting across the threshold. Inside, the couch was upright, the bookshelf undisturbed. The lamp was on, casting a warm glow. Everything was exactly as it should be, but I knew better. I grabbed my things and left, vowing never to return. I don't know what was in that cabin, what I'd awakened by living there. Maybe it was the spirit of the recluse who built it, or something older, something that had always been there, waiting. All I know is that I wasn't alone that night, and I never will be again. Because sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear it, a faint tapping, like fingernails on glass. And I know wherever I go, it's still with me. My name is Mr. Night Wraith, a moniker I adopted in my youth when I fancied myself a collector of the macabre. It suited me, a private investigator with a penchant for cases that skirted the edge of the supernatural. I'd seen my share of strange things, cursed heirlooms, haunted estates, even a possessed typewriter that spat out prophecies in blood-red ink. But nothing prepared me for the case of the locked room at Blackthorn Manor. It was October, the air crisp with the promise of winter when I received the letter. The envelope was yellowed, sealed with black wax, and addressed in spidery script. The sender was one Eleanor Blackthorn, the last living heir of the Blackthorn family, whose ancestral home stood on the outskirts of a forgotten village called Hollow's End. Her message was brief but urgent. She needed my expertise to investigate a room in her manor, a room that had been locked for over a century and was now, inexplicably, causing disturbances. I arrived at Blackthorn Manor on a moonless night, the kind where shadows seemed to have a life of their own. The manor loomed against the horizon, a Gothic monstrosity of crumbling spires and ivy-choked walls. Eleanor greeted me at the door, a frail woman in her 60s with eyes that darted like trapped birds. She led me through cavernous halls lined with portraits of stern-faced Blackthorns, their gazes following us as we passed. "The room is in the east wing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been locked since my great-grandfather's time. No one knows why, but lately, things have changed." "Changed how?" I asked, adjusting the brim of my hat. She hesitated, clutching a locket at her throat. "Noises, scratching, like claws on wood, and sometimes voices, whispers that don't make sense. Last week I found blood on the door, just a smear, but it wasn't there before." I nodded, my curiosity piqued. "Take me to it." The east wing was a labyrinth of dust and decay. Cobwebs draped the chandeliers and the air carried the sour tang of mildew. We stopped before a heavy oak door, its surface carved with intricate runes that seemed to writhe in the flickering light of Eleanor's lantern. A rusted padlock hung from the handle, its keyhole dark and unyielding. "This is it," she said. "No one's been inside since 1893. The key was lost long ago." I examined the door, running my fingers over the runes. They were cold to the touch, almost unnaturally so. "Have you tried breaking it down?" "We did years ago. Axes, crowbars, nothing worked. It's as if the door is protected." I pulled a set of lockpicks from my coat and knelt before the padlock. The mechanism was old, but I'd cracked older. As I worked, a faint sound came from beyond the door, a soft, rhythmic scratching, like nails on a chalkboard. Eleanor gasped, stepping back. "You hear it too?" she whispered. I nodded, my pulse quickening. The lock resisted, the tumblers refusing to yield. Then, without warning, the scratching stopped. A low, guttural voice murmured from the other side, too faint to discern words but heavy with malice. I froze, my lockpick trembling in my hand. "Did you?" I began, but Eleanor was already backing away, her face pale. "I'm sorry, Mr. Nightwraith," she stammered. "I can't stay here. I'll be in the library if you need me." She fled, leaving me alone with the door. I took a deep breath and returned to the lock. After several tense minutes, it clicked open. The padlock fell to the floor with a dull thud, and the door creaked inward of its own accord, revealing a yawning darkness. I lit my flashlight and stepped inside. The air was thick, oppressive, like breathing through wet cloth. The room was small, no larger than a modest study, with bare stone walls and a single window boarded shut. In the center stood a wooden table, its surface stained with dark, irregular splotches. On the table lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and curling. I approached the table, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The journal's cover was embossed with the same runes as the door. I opened it, revealing cramped, frantic handwriting. The entries were dated 1893 and belonged to a man named Cornelius Blackthorn, Eleanor's great-grandfather. His words painted a chilling picture. Cornelius had been obsessed with the occult, conducting rituals in this very room to commune with what he called the Veiled Ones. He believed they held the key to eternal life, but his experiments went awry. The final entry was a scrawl of desperation. "They are here. They see me. The door must stay locked. God forgive me." As I read, the temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in the air, and the flashlight flickered. The scratching resumed, louder now, coming from the walls themselves. I spun around, searching for the source, but the room was empty. Then the journal slammed shut on its own, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. I backed toward the door, my heart pounding. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The runes on the walls began to glow, a sickly green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The scratching grew frantic, accompanied by a chorus of whispers, overlapping and unintelligible. I reached for the door, but it slammed shut before I could cross the threshold. The lock clicked, trapping me inside. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I pounded on the door, shouting for Eleanor, but no one answered. The whispers grew louder, forming words I could almost understand. "Night Wraith, join us. See the truth." I turned back to the room, my flashlight barely cutting through the thickening darkness. The table was no longer empty. A figure stood there, cloaked in shadow, its form humanoid but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Its face was a void, save for two glowing eyes that burned with an ancient, hungry light. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The figure tilted its head as if amused. When it spoke, its voice was a chorus of countless others, layered and dissonant. "We are the Veiled Ones. You opened the door. You belong to us now." I drew my revolver, a futile gesture but all I had. "Stay back!" The figure laughed, a sound that scraped against my soul. The walls pulsed faster, the runes blazing. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest. I fired, the bullet passing through the figure as if it were smoke. It advanced, its eyes boring into mine, and I felt my thoughts unraveling, memories slipping away like sand through my fingers. Desperate, I lunged for the journal, hoping it held some clue to undoing this nightmare. As I touched it, a jolt of energy surged through me, and the figure recoiled, hissing. The runes dimmed slightly and the whispers faltered. I flipped through the pages, searching for anything useful. Buried in Cornelius's ramblings was a reference to a banishing ritual, one that required blood and will to seal the Veiled Ones away. I didn't have much time. The figure was recovering, its form solidifying. I pulled a knife from my belt and sliced my palm, wincing as blood welled up. Following Cornelius's instructions, I smeared the blood on the runes carved into the table, chanting the Latin phrases he'd written. My voice trembled, but I pressed on, pouring every ounce of defiance into the words. The room shook, the walls cracking as the runes flared brighter than ever. The figure screamed, a sound that threatened to shatter my eardrums. The whispers became wails and the air grew scorching hot. I finished the chant, slamming my bloody hand onto the table's center. A shockwave erupted, knocking me to the floor. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. The runes were dark, the whispers silent. The door creaked open, revealing the hallway beyond. I staggered to my feet, clutching the journal, and stumbled out of the room. The door slammed shut behind me, the lock clicking into place. Eleanor found me in the hallway, her face a mask of terror. "What happened? I heard things." "It's over," I said, my voice hoarse. "But that room stays locked. Forever." I left Blackthorn Manor at dawn, the journal tucked safely in my coat. I never returned to Hollow's End, but the memory of that night haunts me still. Sometimes in the quiet hours, I hear whispers in the dark calling my name. And sometimes I wonder if I truly escaped the Veiled Ones, or if they're still watching, waiting for another door to open.